Order. Chairman, roll call. Eastwood Alderman Rob Foster.
Here.
Eastwood Alderman Mark Bowers.
Here.
Mayor Alderman Smith. Here. Westwood Alderman David Cameron. Here. Westwood Alderman Stacey Lee. Here. Please stand for a moment of silent prayer or reflection, followed by the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And thank you for those who are present and those that are online. This is where we explain that we are only permitting elected officials and select staff who need to present at the meeting to be in person, while the public and others present online in efforts to curb the coronavirus pandemic. So we are going to move on to the approval of the minutes for July 23rd and August 5th as provided in the board packet.
So nothing of substance, but just a typo on the second page of the BOA 604B. Alderman Foster made a motion to approve the range. Again, nothing of substance. Just and I would just move to approve if that's correct.
Second. Motion and a second. All in favor?
All right.
Okay. Expenditures were included in the packet as well. Monica, is there anything specific outside of the memo that you'd like to point out? I think that's all I know. That would be anything more. Okay.
Mayor, will be approving both sets of.
Yes.
Okay.
If no comment on expenses, I'll entertain a motion. Motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. COVID update. Michael Taylor, welcome back.
Hello. I'm kind of a little bit of an abbreviated report. I did get it out late this afternoon. We'll kind of just start there at the Webster County numbers. Currently, we have 138 cases. I realize DHSS is reporting 140 some. We're not really clear where that number came from, but 138 was as of 2 o'clock, and then I actually got a message after that we actually had another one. So I believe the case number is going to truly be 139. And that's out of 3,858 persons tested. Currently 18 are actively ill, which that number may actually be 19 now that we got that other one. 4 of which are central region. Currently we have 0 patients that are hospitalized as directly related to COVID. We do have one in the hospital that has COVID from Webster County, but it was incidental. It was found on a pre-op screening. And 119 have recovered. And I know if you do the math on that, we got to remember to add the 1 death in there, and that's the reason the numbers kind of look a little funky. Along with that, 18 pending results. Approximately 50 are being quarantined or monitored, and approximately 45 are being quarantined. And again, we've had 1 death to date in Webster County. The cases by county are there, and you'll notice there's some pretty significant upticks in other counties as well. Many of them have more than doubled since the last time we spoke. The cases up there by age, and death by age, and cases by sex, you'll notice those numbers have grown substantially, especially in that 20 to 29 age group. As far as the number of cases, that's hit up there to 13,655. Something happened with the numbers. I reported that we'd had 1 death under 20. at the last briefing, and then as of shortly thereafter, they took that down. So I'm not exactly sure what happened there. Females are still more likely to get the virus than men. Again, kind of real brief, we're looking at vaccine becoming more and more likely in the future. Several pharmaceutical companies and other countries are kind of at a race to get there, and some of them are getting pretty close from what I'm understanding. We did have a drive-through testing site on July 27th. It was pretty well attended, and we tested 39 persons for COVID. We did find 2 positive results, both of which were not in Webster County. And then 23 persons were tested for antibodies, and we found 0 that had those antibodies. We do have another drive-through test scheduled for August the 24th at the fairgrounds. It will still be free of charge. Symptomatic and asymptomatic persons will be tested, and antibody testing will also be available. One thing I wanted to bring out is that some changes are occurring to the structure of the task force group, and the future of that task force is kind of unknown at this time. The changes in Webster County statistics since the last briefing, cases have increased by 48. Persons tested have increased by 1,089, so testing is still up in the county. And then our actively ill have decreased from the last by 27 countywide. With that, just recommendations. We're still seeing that rather significant increase in the county. And I feel it's just important that we continue doing what we're doing and keep the guidelines that we have, the requirements that we have in place, at least until we see maybe a downward trend, which we're not really seeing in Webster County yet. So that concludes that, unless you guys have some questions for me.
Hey, Michael, on the antibody test, do you know if those 28 people had previously tested positive, or were they just curious?
None of those, to my knowledge, had previously tested positive. I think they were all people who had thought maybe they had it, that maybe they'd been ill in recent weeks or months, and they wanted to know if they had the antibodies.
Okay.
Do you know if the task force has changed, or what the conversation has been about requiring face masks at businesses and so forth, or what the consensus is, or the thought on that might be?
Well, there hasn't been a consensus. We put out a document a couple months ago, if you remember, and in that document, we did encourage that municipalities consider requiring businesses to require mask usage. But there hasn't been any discussion since then. So that document and I'd have to look back to see what the date was, but month and a half ago would be the most recent time that we discussed that.
Would it be worthwhile to have the task force present maybe at the next meeting with school starting and take a look at the numbers together and see if there would be a consensus?
And I shouldn't have said there was no consensus. There was a consensus, there just hasn't been recent discussion. And the consensus at that time was to encourage municipalities to encourage businesses. As far as having the task force present, I'll be very honest, I'm not sure that there will be a task force come next meeting. There's been some changes at the request of the Webster County Health Board, and that's led to a number of the members dropping out of the task force. It was changed from a task force to an advisory board. Several of those changes, like I said, led a lot of people to leave. I haven't been able to attend the last 2 because of other issues. One was vacation and one was an election day. But the other problem is they're going to be on Tuesday evenings, which takes myself and Lisa both out of the mix. We'd requested that they not put them on Tuesday evenings, and so far they have put them on Tuesday evenings, which we already have training engagements set for. As of right now, I think I am still the only remaining member, possibly the only remaining member of the original group.
Wow. That might be a topic of discussion. I mean,
We would always put it on the
keep
future
your eye,
agenda.
especially if numbers pop up at school.
Right, so I did, the numbers that I presented, the additional numbers that I presented at the last meeting, while I did keep tabs on some of those, I was not able to track those that way because that file was on the computer shop. But in my communications with the health department and the health board, the total number of active cases in our area have decreased. And they are probably about as low as they were at the first point of July, where we really started to see the spike. With that, I questioned the health department this week on whether or not they were looking at making a change, not in the more restrictive area, in the other direction. And I did receive a resounding no. We think school will be an issue, which I think is the general consensus everywhere, right?
Then why was the summer school issue? I mean,
Lower numbers, maybe, like,
but you mix age groups.
Uh-huh.
They've been at school, they've been here playing t-ball across
Right.
the ages. We had a staff member test positive, not a single child in her room did.
right.
I think
So-
there should have been, it was a perfect opportunity for something at some scale to happen, but it didn't.
So I think we could definitely entertain having members of the health department and Michael, if he's the last man standing from the task force, come together and talk to us more about this subject.
Well, the question would be, do we want to ensure that it is prevented at school, or are we gonna wait till 4 or 5 kids test positive and then, oh, we better wear masks?
So let's at least go with that plan to have them present and let's have discussion.
Absolutely.
Frank
Our current
it open
orders-
discussion.
I think that would be very possible. I'll
I mean,
reach
you
out to
know,
them.
you know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah, I didn't know it was discussion.
Not-
with them.
I just think it would be wise to have a discussion on it.
Absolutely. Anything else on COVID, Michael?
No, I wasn't able to understand that last part of the conversation, but I don't know if it was directed anything towards me or not, so.
Somewhat. We are gonna reach out to the board and the remaining task force members and see if we can bring them into the next meeting for additional discussion on the topic.
Yes.
Okay. So with that, we will move on to the Aquatic Center. And Mark, will you give the full update?
Yes, ma'am. Vortex sent out their subcontractor, Mike Embry, to the pool. Mike Embry finished up the punch list on the play structure, repaired the gouges, scratches, unfinished edges on fiberglass, and things of that nature. Addressed every single item on the punch list for those things. He completed that on Monday and was finished on Tuesday morning. In addition, he installed a newly fabricated control box for the bucket release and the bucket dump, including a new computer software program that they had written for that as well. So Vortex contracted that out to be built and basically refabricated from scratch, and along with a brand new computer software to run that. When Mike was out, he had that portion of the bucket functional, but evidently there's another piece, mechanical piece down in the bucket that is not functioning like it should. He needs to get a lift in to repair that. So those repairs won't be able to be made until the season has concluded and the water is out of the pool. Everything else on the punch list is completely finished, and Miss Natalie and I were there and looked at everything, signed off on that.
Yeah, so I did get the opportunity to go out and review what work was done on Tuesday and meet Mike Embry. I will add that Mike was incredibly impressed with our lifeguard staff. He made numerous comments about their dedication and how they seem to really take it seriously. And that he even expected, you know, most kids will kind of slack off a little bit when the director leaves the campus. He never saw that. So he was just extremely impressed. He says he's worked in pools and all over the country, and this was by far one of the best teams of lifeguards he's seen. So I wanted to throw that out there as well. It meant a lot coming from somebody who's probably seen a whole lot more than I have anyway. So, but everything with that play center looks brand new, better than it did when it was first installed. And the only thing that we currently have an issue with is the bucket still won't dump. It will dump manually, right?
I believe so.
Yeah, there's a little key fob, and if you wanted to sit there and put the button all the time, it will dump. But the whatever the programming is, that when the float is at the top, tells it to dump. Just, he said that now it was the motor. And he has another motor in North Carolina, and he was gonna get with Vortex and they'd be back. So the other two items, and I'm gonna kind of flip these a little bit. I'm gonna go into pay applications first and then talk about grants. So we have two pay applications that are remaining for this pool project that we have been hanging on to until the punch list was complete. We also now have a warranty on the entire structure and another warranty on the bucket software itself that takes us until May 1st of 2022. Those are outside of the agreement that we had with the contractor. I myself feel like we are very well covered on any future issue that should come up with that. Vortex seems to have been great to work with. They're incredibly responsive. They responded to an email on Sunday. So I was very impressed with that. So I feel that we should go ahead with these pay applications because I now feel like we are protected in a different way for future issues on this structure. What are your thoughts? Any discussion on that topic?
So the only outline thing is that motor.
Do we have any writing that they'll come back and replace that?
We have a warranty, right?
We have a warranty that says they have to, until 2022. So we have an entire season, and hopefully we have an opening to where we would still see that that was functional if for some reason.
Really, what's owed is to the contractor, right?
Correct.
Vortex already been paid and so forth,
Yes.
right? So it wouldn't, there's nothing we could withhold that would impact them anyway,
No,
right?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Because I think that's important to acknowledge that we wouldn't penalize Vortex at all by withholding anything, just the contractor.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So at this point, we have two pay applications. One is pay application 16, which is for $11,143.50. And then we have the retainage, which is pay application 17, which is $70,356.50. And those are included in your packet. And if interested, I would definitely entertain a motion to pay these.
Yeah, I know that we paid.
Second.
Motion and a second, all in favor? Fantastic. Okay, so now I'd like to go into the COP balance, which,
I'm so sorry. Did we want to talk about the days and get that finalized once and for all, or is that?
we're okay with paying these. We weren't worried about the rain days.
No,
Okay. Yeah, I think we're good. Okay, so I am looking at this Marshfield Aquatic Pool Project 2018 certificate of participation. And at the very bottom right-hand corner of this box, it should end with $81,852. Made you move. Okay, so what this is a breakdown of the proceeds of the bond and all interest we have received and all expenses that have been paid out of those certificates of participation. So down at the bottom, we have now approved these 11,143.50 and the 73,56.50. There is a number directly above that, which is titled Proposed COP Purchases, see attached list. That particular list is actually 2-3 pages back, which is entitled 2019 Parks COP Purchase List. These items were included in a packet that was provided to you all in October of 2019. And at that point, the page before it is a similar schedule that showed you where you were at. And the page before that is a copy of those minutes, which breaks down that John Benson was asking the board's decision about what happens to the rest of the money left in the COPs. And based on these minutes, it was the board's consensus that they were reimbursing the transportation fund. However, these items listed here were not purchased. They didn't really need your approval. They were already required, or they were required as part of the pool. They were in our equipment list. We just hadn't bought them. They were in the October list. And most of these items we still need, correct, Mark?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Can you point out again for me what items on this list we may not need?
Yes, absolutely. On this list, we do not need the laptop computer for the card reader, and we do not need a new card reader, and we do not need a new POS system at the pool. So the final 3 items are not needed at this point.
So do we not need them because we do not need them, or do we not need them because we've already purchased them?
We do not need them because we've got a system in place that is working just as well,
Okay.
or better than having the those extra things.
Okay. So those 3 items are out. Are there additional items since October that have come up?
Yes, there are a couple of things that could be added to this list since October, one of which is the need for a gate that is on the back end by the pump rooms where the chemicals are stored. The truck currently has a road and it backs up to the fence, but there's no gate to get through. And so have to lift those hoses and things from the back of the truck and the tanks over the fence and through the door. And he has to go all the way down, come in and take the hoses and put them in and then go all the way back around. It would be very convenient to have a gate right there for chemical delivery.
Okay. And is that the only thing we're wanting to add to this?
And the other thing is that we have noticed that the pump that pumps the chlorine pump, it's one of those situations where it barely keeps up with the amount of chlorine that we need in the pool on a hot day. And the suggestion was made in several pool systems. The chemical guy said most of the pool systems have 2 pumps, and ours is cranked all the way up as high as it will possibly go and is working as hard as it can. So most pool systems have 2 pumps. They're cranked down to about half. And if they need to kick it up a little bit, there's room to kick up a little bit. If one of the pumps goes down, there's a backup pump in its place that can be cranked up that can take over and keep the chemicals feeding. And if we were to have a fecal contamination at our facility of the liquid variety, the chemicals to treat that are going to have to be elevated and kept at that elevated state for a certain number of hours, depending on how high we can keep the level before we get opened back up again. And that pump that we have now will not elevate the chemicals to that level and keep them there. The second pump would be able to do that.
Do you have any idea how much you've looked into it, so how much is a pump like that gonna cost?
I've got a quote on the way from the chemical supplier Hawkins. They have not provided that.
Because that may be a 21 budget item,
Sure.
depending on how much that is. The other question I have is, this goes back almost a year. May as well be a year based on what's happened with prices. So has any of this been updated at all? On pricing and quotes?
No, I would love to have a chance to update the entire
Let's
list.
do that.
And there's not any shipping in with these costs either.
Okay.
Some of the shipping is free. I've looked into a few things. Let me give you an example. The very first item on the list is a lap lane reel. That lap lane reel can be purchased for $1,978.92 now with free shipping. So some of the prices have fluctuated up, some of the prices have fluctuated down. Just really depends on their inventory and what they're trying to move.
So you're going to take a look at that and then bring it back?
Yes, sir.
Revised?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That sounds good.
So I'd like to have that updated list at the next meeting, please.
Okay.
And at that time, we will bring back an updated COP schedule, if that's all right, Monica. And that way we will have a final on our dollar value that is going to transportation. Okay? Okay. So moving on from there, new city hall updates. I wanted to add this back on there because we haven't talked about it recently, but we have done some work on this. We have been in discussion with the current leaseholder for a portion of that structure and talking with them about their space needs. We had a discussion just today, another discussion with the bond council to determine what was available in financing, what the current market looks like, and to get some ideas there. We have new updated figures coming this week. And then we have also reached out again to Show Me, who is working on scheduling another meeting with us to understand the hub situation in more detail and to understand the difference between the hub and the loop and how those costs go together and how they are yet separate. So getting clarification on there. We are getting very close to this. So this is going to be one of those things that we're going to carry over from meeting to meeting to meeting on the agenda so that I can at least tell you where we're at. And once those three things come into picture, we will actually hold discussion on the item. And there will be actual things in here for you to look at. Okay.
That sounds good, and it could coordinate really well with this upcoming discussion on budget.
Absolutely.
For 21.
So that's all that was meant to be. And our next item is Frisco Park. And Paul?
I'm unmuted.
No, sir.
So this was brought up a week or so ago. Mark Baker and I think Sam brought up the issue of maybe doing a quiet title lawsuit to squelch any potential claims to Frisco Park. I don't know what kind of started that as far as at the outset, but I just wanted to let the board know if the board is inclined to start some sort of quiet title suit. And basically what that is kind of like the name entails. It's if there potentially are competing claims to a piece of property, you file, one person that believes they have a claim to it files what's called a quiet title suit. And then that you give notice basically to the world and see who comes out of the woodwork as far as who thinks they have a valid claim to it. And in this instance, I don't know that there really is anybody out there. And so once probably 45 days passes, just to allow enough time for anybody that is out there, the judge here in Webster County would enter a judgment that could be recorded that just basically for all the rest of time, so to speak, gives Marshfield the ownership of Frisco Park.
So how this arose was during our Parks Master Planning process. the idea that the city didn't actually own that property bubbled up in some conversation that I'm sure I was present for, but I don't remember the source of. At that time, it was my impression that we thought Burlington Northern actually owned that property. Through title searches and other work that was done on the park committee, park board level, it was determined that there actually is no legal owner of that property. So that is where we approached Paul with, hey, how do we do this? The last thing we wanted to do was invest money in significant improvements in a property that we don't have legal title to. So that's where this has come from. And the question here is, do we want to move forward with a quiet title suit so that we legally have ownership of our park?
So it's a complicated question. And when you put it in light of the way you just described it, which is there's no record of anybody having title, but we have maintained it and are using it. Why stir it up? The other question I have is the quiet title search would be just by legal description only. It wouldn't be who does anybody own Frisco Park, right?
Right, it's the
Right.
suit is filed by legal.
Just to be
It would
really
be by legal description. Now, I mean, I can't guarantee you that somebody wouldn't pick up on the fact that it's Frisco Park and, you know, there'd be some headline somewhere that cities want to make sure they own Frisco Park. I mean, but I mean, yes, the lawsuit would just have the legal description.
Yeah. I don't know. If it ain't broke, you fix it. But
Continue investing in property that's not ours.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's the kicker.
well, the question is there a valid reason to believe it's not ours?
No.
Okay.
Not in my mind. I mean, it is Frisco Park, right? I don't know when Frisco Park came to be, but
It's a complicated question.
one we'd like to hold discussion on later. We want to table the matter.
That's on the table.
Motion for table.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly don't want to take action, whether we table or don't table. I'd say at the least table, yeah.
Okay, we will table and kick it back to the park and let them kind of maybe give us more information on why they want us to go forward.
And
Or
there's no way to
why?
trace it back and figure out.
I mean, we understand enough now, right?
I think
We
so.
should just decide what we want to do.
I have a search that was done by D.D. Hamilton Title Company in September 20th of 2019 here that said the last deed of record was to South Pacific Railroad. And if I'm correct, there's no South Pacific Railroad anymore, and that they didn't find anything else. They went back to the pages, looked through all the books, and I've got this thing that's handwritten, filed July 21st of 1869 regarding the South Pacific Railroad, and that's the only thing that was found in all the records, and they've written this letter saying that they couldn't find any ownership.
Anything after that.
Yes.
Okay.
Shawnee's on here. She texted me and asked if she could speak on this letter.
Absolutely.
Shawnee, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yep. Go ahead.
I guess a question I would have is going forward, if we're not going to pursue ownership of Frisco, would you want the Parks Board to move forward with master plans for that park?
Yeah, I'd sort of break the question down to the last part. I would think we of course, to me, of course, we continue the master plan for that park. Yeah,
Okay.
we're working on the assumption that that's ours at least to operate and have been for I don't know if anybody remembers when we haven't, right? So
I most
to
certainly do.
me, regardless of what we do, we continue the master plan with it. Yeah.
Okay,
The only time, and Rob, you may remember this, the only time that it's ever been brought up about anybody else owning it was when we were having those meetings on that
Right.
transportation center. Burlington was at the table.
Yeah.
And they did throw it out there that, I don't recall exactly what was said to you, but they
Well-
acknowledged the park and they acknowledged that,
Well, what I recall about it very specifically is Nick, who was there,
hey, yes,
wouldn't be anybody who would do anything but claim everything he could
I agree,
and deny helping in any way that he could.
I agree.
Or Burlington Northern's, which I believe that he was not speaking well for his company, but he was completely anti-collaborative in every respect.
I agree. But that's the only.
Mayor, this is Paul, if I could, I would also throw out there that since we really don't think anybody else is claiming ownership, the other side of the coin would be if somebody else down the road did claim ownership, they would have to file a quiet title suit, the same as what we would do, and give notice to us. I mean, I guess to flip it on its head, we could wait and see if somewhere down the road somebody made that kind of a claim in a lawsuit and then assert our position in that lawsuit. So I guess to kind of go along with what Rob was saying, if nobody's out there claiming anything, you just go along as business as usual. And then if somebody claims anything, we could always raise our position as owner of it in a lawsuit that maybe never gets filed or gets filed years down the road.
Yeah, so, and I like that, Paul, and is it reasonable to say we are the only people acting like we own it? And
Correct.
that goes a long way.
Yeah, a quiet title suit is similar to an adverse possession suit, where we would be saying that we've been owned, so therefore that would be our best evidence as to why it's our park.
okay. So we'll go with not at this time. All right,
But business as usual.
right.
And we might, for a future agenda item, bring back the notion of using that space that's beyond the outfield as a detention. Stormwater detention. Not to retain it, but just slow it down, because that's been something we wanted to do for a long time until this was cleared up. But
Okay.
we could bring that up at a
Later meeting.
Yep.
Okay. We'll go on the agenda then. Our next item is term limits. And this item came up at the last meeting. And during an NML training that I was sitting in last week, this was barely touched upon. And so I reached out to Paul to give me some more information on what we can do with term limits. And Paul, I'll let you explain that.
Okay. So just by way of a short background, Marshfield's a fourth-class city, as most of you probably know. Fourth-class cities are governed by Chapter 79 of Missouri statutes. Chapter 79, it's kind of a weird deal that all those statutes were drafted in 1939 and for the most part haven't been updated. But that is the statutes that the city of Marshfield and most cities, at least in Southwest Missouri, fall under. And so in doing some research on term limits for fourth-class cities, and I also reached out to Missouri Municipal League and talked to some other city attorneys and just basically kind of got the full circle on this. There basically is no state law that grants the authority for a fourth-class city such as Marshfield to impose term limits. That state law outlines the qualifications for serving as an elected official for fourth-class cities, but it does not include a limit on the years served, or does it provide authority for a governing body to impose basically term limits on elected officials. So the short answer is basically state law in Missouri doesn't allow for term limits to be imposed in a fourth-class city.
Any other discussion, or is that sufficient for the matter? Yeah,
There's no way to do it.
not having to be binding.
How's that?
Okay, so we will go on from there. Paul, thank you so much.
You bet. Are you wanting me to sign off now?
You're welcome to, or you're welcome to just join.
Well, I'm happy to stay with you. I just didn't know if you were good with, if you had thought anything else I was needed for.
I think that'll take care of it tonight. Thank you.
All right. Well, you all have a good evening. I appreciate it. See ya.
Thanks, Paul.
All right. Our next item on the agenda is ICC building codes. So also in the MML training that I was attending, they were talking about various ordinances and resolutions and how they had to be passed. And the item of building codes came in. And they said something that I didn't know before. They explained that a number of copies of a building code, the books, have to be actually physically in City Hall for 90 days before you can enact their requirements, which is something I didn't know. What I did know from being on the Finance Committee was that we had budgeted for 3 copies of the books to be purchased this year. So I reached out to Rick, because I was sitting in here watching the training and asked him kind of where we were on that. And what I've learned is that he is actually working towards being able to get the certifications in that area. But we currently have adopted the 2012 ICC codes, and he is not able to be certified in those. They're too old. So they come out every 3 years. He has the option of 2015, 2018, and 2021, which just came out. So what I would like to ask the board, well, let me add to this. There is some benefit, in my opinion, to getting those books in here as soon as possible, or making a decision on what year to go with first, and then getting those books in here as soon as possible. Because if we can have them in City Hall by October 2nd, I believe is the cutoff date, then our 9 months will expire at the end of the year, and there will be a very clean break between those projects that were permitted in 2020 fall under this, and these that were permitted in 2021 fall under this. So I like, if we have to change from one to another, I like nice clean breaks. That's just me. So what I am asking you is, it is a budgeted expense. We just need to know which year. Would you like 2015, 2018, or 2021? And Rick is online to help me explain the pros and cons of each.
So while you're unmuting him or getting him ready, this is also a very complicated question, because when you jump that many codes, there is a lot of change that people may or may not be prepared for, and that would require either a lot of education, or you will run into a lot of frustration and a lot of pushback and a lot of resistance and some hatefulness.
Right.
Right.
So my understanding.
So we have to be really careful we understand, and we're the body voting for it.
Right.
So I think it's really important that every person, every voting member understand what the implication of change, whichever set is being considered change to.
Right.
Because it is potentially a great number of changes and a big leap from one to the next.
And I agree with great number of changes. I asked Rick in our discussion, hey, can you give me a list of what changed between the two so I could present to the board? And he came back with a book, literally a book, that was the changes between, and this was 12 and 15. Is that right, Rick? And there were actually 2 different books. So I'm going to say that there's about like this. And I did not go through and read that, but I did flip through a few pages just to understand, kind of what they changed, and most of it seemed to be clarification, but I'm quite certain that there are big things in there as well. I just don't know what they are.
So there's another thing, and it's not, and I don't mean it because it's what it would drive what we have to do, but just so we're informed, right? We ought to know the, in context of the folks that it's gonna most directly, it involves, it impacts the public and public safety. That is obvious.
Okay.
But our point of contact on enforcing and controlling these codes and enforcement of those codes is with contractors. And so it would be interesting to understand in this area where contractors, you know, in our surrounding counties where a lot of contractors from this area would be working in multiple counties.
Right.
What are the other codes? Maybe that's already presented.
Well, I think Rick might have some information on it.
That'd be good.
I know the Ozark Nix area is 2018. Springfield is still 2012, and there's a lot of pushback still on the 2018s from a lot of the guys because it's really confusing and really ties them down. I'm more leaning towards the 2015 just because it's the next step, and we don't, you know, just drown these guys overnight. A lot of these guys are working in the Springfield area, so they're accustomed to the tighter codes because they'll mention that. Even guys coming in out of town, you know, they'll want to know where we are. So they're pretty complex in all areas as far as what levels we're at. You know, my concern is that I just can't get the search in 2012 anymore. Where do we want to go with that, or where would you guys want to go with that?
How often do you have to recertify? Is this something you do every 3 years, or is it?
3 years. It's every 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, I know nothing about these code books, but I mean, it would seem to make sense to me that if it's every 3 years, well, then when you're forced to move up to the next, you move up to the next, and
Right.
rather than jump all the way to the front.
In theory, we usually try to stay at least one behind just so they can work out the kinks. And I still think 2018 still has some issues. And then I did see where the 2021 books are out. There's a lot of people don't like the 2018 still. It's too complicated. But, you know, that's the reason I brought, you know, I've been kind of talking about it because I'd like to get the certifications, but in the 2012, we don't. I can get the 2015 and we can stay where we are. It just, I can't do a 2012. That's kind of why we want to talk with you guys. Put that before you and let you make that call.
You can say Springfield 12.
Springfield is 2012. And Nixa and Ozark are 2018.
Right. Yeah.
That's having challenges.
Right.
And
So his recommendation.
And I've heard a lot of contractors mention how they just are turning down business in those areas because
Yeah, that's what I'm afraid of is we get too tight. And, you know, again, we can stay where we are. It just, I'll need to get a few books to get to the 2015 certification. You know, I just want to make sure you guys are aware. That's where my holdup is getting certified. Is I can't where we are. I can go to the 2015 just to get the certifications, but you know, I just got to get.
Maybe 2012. Rick, are you saying that? I'm sorry, Rick. You're saying that you could be certified in 2015, even though we may still operate 2012.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
That's
Okay.
permissible?
Yeah.
So
Okay.
we would only need to buy one set of the books.
Yeah.
Instead of three.
Yeah, that's a good position to be right now.
I agree. You know, let's get to that level. I can, you know, get into that a whole lot more than if we ever make that move, which I feel we need to at some point down the road, because you know we're going to get a lot more houses going, and hopefully, you know, the houses continue to grow north and big companies get in here, and we just be prepared for that.
That's all right. Okay, so would we like to just purchase one set of the 2015 books? and let him become certified in that, and then we can visit changing our adoption of codes at a later date.
Yeah.
Okay. Can we still take a vote without, or do we need a vote? It's a budgeted item. We don't need a vote. So we're saying go ahead and buy one set of 2015.
So what you're saying is you want to stay with the 2012 building codes is the clarification.
Correct.
Yep.
Correct.
Nope,
We want to
that's all.
stay with 2012.
Nope, that's all we need.
Check on Amazon, it might be used.
Right.
Can't hurt.
All right, Rick, you got what you need?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Touch base with you again tomorrow, just to make sure it's clear. So,
Yep, no, that's good. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Thank you very much.
you bet.
Okay. Sam, change order number 4.
Yep, so Julie Jensen with CMT is on here as well. At a previous meeting, you guys had approved to give me the authority to spend up to $15,000 on change orders as they came in if they were time sensitive. So what you got on here is some change orders that I've already approved, or change order number 4 that I've already approved. So if you have any questions after I get done, Julie would be glad to fill you in. Basically, there was a connection that had to be made at Julian and Elm Street in the middle of the night. So it got to be about 1, 2 o'clock in the morning when we were buttoning that thing up. And there was, those pipes don't always just align perfectly, right? The elevation of the existing line and the new line, you just gotta piecemeal it together when you get down to the very end of it. And so that's what the first change order that you see is for the first RFI number 1. That $3,300, that's what that's for. It's just basically for elbows and fittings to get those 2 pipes to line up. Item number 2 for the 9,000. So starting yesterday, and they worked on it today, and I think that they'll be through it tomorrow. They're at Golf Course Road and Elm Street. They've got the water mains ran everywhere, but that section called for a bore rather than an open cut. If it had been an open cut, then they would have just continually laid that line down through there and kept going. In that process, currently there was no way to isolate that line where they can disinfect it and take their samples and get everything back up and going and keep that other line live and going so that they could still feed that, all of that out Golf Course Road, all that new subdivision, everything out there feeds off of one line. There was not enough valving there in order to take place. And so this $9,000 takes care of that so that they can get it up and tested and pass the bacterial off the samples and then put it back on service. So that's what the change order is. It's not it's nothing that you guys need to necessarily approve. I've already approved them, but in that, when you guys gave me the authority to do that, I was to bring those back as soon as I did it. So that's what this. Julie, you have anything you'd add to that?
I don't think so. I think that really just covered it. And the other thing I would add is the 12,300 is coming out of the contingency.
Yeah.
So I put the contingency running total there.
Yeah, on the second page of that change order, you'll see Julie went ahead and she updated the contingency amount. And so basically the bottom line is contingency remaining after change order number 1, after change order number 4 is approved is $153,720.
Okay. And how far along are we in this project? Percentage of completion?
Oh gosh, probably 25%, maybe.
Something like that. We can do a little bit of legwork and kind of narrow that number down. But yeah, there's still a lot of pieces that have to be done at other places. That particular section, I don't 90, Julie, probably.
Yeah, probably. They just have to test it and then reconnect the water services. So the water line portion along Elm is about done.
Okay.
That portion's done, but this
It's the
contract,
well houses.
this contract carries over into the well house improvements, and,
Okay.
and they're finishing that up. They're doing some other work in conjunction with it, but their main focus is trying to get that tied up.
Okay. So no action is required on that. That was for informational purposes only. Are there any other questions on the matter? All right, then let's move on to the 2020 property tax levy.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
And Monica?
Yes. So every year I will present to you the property tax levies that are proposed for, it's for 2020, but for our budget purposes, it'll be for 2021. Your next meeting will have a public hearing. It's required before September 1st. So this is just informational for you. The parks and the cemetery property tax levy is set by a formula that the state comes through with, and it has to do with the Hancock Amendment. So that can only be adjusted in increments, small increments. So you can always decrease it, but the amount that it increases is usually fairly small because as your assessed values increase, just that formula, the assessed values increase, you're only allowed to increase the taxes so much over the CPI, I believe it is.
Correct.
So the cemetery board has looked at their property tax levy and has approved that. The parks board will be looking at that later this month before your next meeting. The one I kind of wanted to point out a little bit of information to you is the debt service levy. Right now, it's been probably since I've been here, it's been at 37 cents. That debt service levy is to cover our general obligation bonds, which at the moment is the 2018 general obligation bonds for the street improvements, the I-44 project. Legally, you're allowed to raise your property tax limit to cover that debt service, which on the paperwork it shows 1.8622.
Which page are you on? Are you on Form A?
It's towards the end of it. There's on the top right hand corner under purpose of levy, it says debt service.
Oh, yeah.
Form C.
So there are several, okay, I see.
Yes, there's a, for parks,
cemetery.
and then the cemetery.
More than one. Debt service, okay.
Yes.
And that's what Rob, you were stepped out there, so that's what she was saying on the parks and cemetery, those are the ones that are set by the Hancock Amendment, you can only do those behind them. These are.
Yeah, so the debt service, when we went out for the 10 million in GO bonds, the intent was to use this 37-cent levy and then our transportation fund sales tax to cover that debt service. So, you know, you will have the choice, but to leave it at 37 cents, and then there'll be no tax increase for property owners on that. And then the remaining balance of the debt service would come from the transportation fund sales tax.
About how much comes out of the transportation fund each year to cover this debt? That's okay.
Yes, I want to say probably 400,000, 500.
I think it's between 450 and 500,000. We looked at that, and you know, with being conservative, if I go off of what Monica and I looked at, there would be an additional $200,000, give or take, remaining.
So about 500. The debt service will go up in 2021 to $826,000 for the interest and principal. And so yes, about 200,000 from the transportation. No, about 500,000 of the transportation sales tax will be used for the debt service. And then this debt service levy is about 300,000 that will be used for that.
So are you looking for direction on whether or not the board wants to raise that levy or maintain the 0.37? The 37 cents?
Yes, I mean, yes. It won't, nothing will be, I mean, we have to have the public hearing next, at our next meeting. And so at that point, we will be approving that.
There's no intent from staff to ask the board to raise that. This is more of an informational thing. This comes around once a year. And so it's a lot to take in right there. And so Monica and I talked about it. And I think it is important for the board to understand what you can and can't do, right? And so with the ones that are set by the Hancock Amendment, those are very minute. The debt levy, you could, if you so chose, you could raise that to cover the debt. But by utilizing the transportation fund, that's how all this has been geared up, and that's how this has been budgeted and planned. So really, we just didn't want to bring it to you at your next meeting for consideration, and then ask you to pass it the same night. And so tonight's just an FYI, there's no action needed, there's no action that really can be taken, because the public hearing has to happen first. But it does have to be approved before September 1st.
Okay.
Monica, on that page, it's Form C, right?
Yes,
Well, on that page, where does it actually say 37 cents?
it does not. What we do is when we.
You just plug it in and that produces the numbers on the right hand
Yeah, so
column.
you'll see the less voluntary reduction. We'll reduce it, so the actual rate will be that 37 down on that bottom. Once it's approved, we would put those numbers there.
We would reduce it voluntarily,
Correct.
and that's to square with that debt obligation.
Yes. Well, it's so you're not raising, you're utilizing another revenue source to pay the debt service. If the transportation fund sales tax was going to sunset, or if that transportation fund sales tax dried up, we have the ability to raise
Make it up here.
Yes.
Get the ability to cover that.
Yes.
Okay.
So because we are using that as well, we're keeping this the same as what it's been.
Okay. Great.
And
Thanks for that.
includes with all our taxpayers, we just go for a new property tax for the fire department, so. You know,
Well, they're in the
already
mood.
taken on to that.
So we got enough that. No.
Right. Okay, so thank you for explaining all that. So let's roll into the 2020 budget amendment number 1. And I'll introduce this as we are again putting this in front of you for discussion and consideration. There is a bill here, but we are not looking to pass this tonight. One of the things that occurred as we were going through the transition to mayor was that I reached out to Monica and Sam and said, hey, let's get a handle on how COVID is impacting our budgets. And Monica immediately went to calculating what our sales tax decline would look like, looking at our interest issues, and worked with the Parks Department on the loss of revenue from funds, from the late opening of the pool, and various things that have directly impact our budget. And the municipal court is another area where we had to actually cut services, eliminate that service for a period of time. So therefore, there's a revenue cost in that. So they started working on this actually back in April when we started having discussions, and numbers started coming together in May, and just trying to get a really good handle on where are we and what does that look like for the rest of 2020. So I'll turn it back over to Ben and I'll just chime in.
So it looks like we've got, let me make sure I see that one of the pages I'm looking at, the city of Marshfield budget 2020 amendment 1, where it effectively consolidates the revenues and the expenses.
Yes.
It looks like the expenses are up $760,000
Yes.
from budget.
Yes, but that's, since we were going to do a budget amendment, I wanted to go ahead and include our transportation capital project, the budgeted dollars for the Elm Street extension that was approved. I think at the last meeting, maybe $400,000 for that grading of Elm Street.
Which is part of the debt package.
Correct.
Yeah.
It won't be paid out of cash.
Okay.
It's from those GO bonds, correct.
Okay,
But
all right. So
because
covered in that sense and not really a conventional budget impact.
correct.
Is that fair to say?
That's correct.
Okay,
Yes, but because we had approved it, I really wanted to
sure.
put that in the
Okay,
budget.
I appreciate that. Just wanted to be sure.
Okay, and then also on the transportation fund, so we have the money budgeted for our square project. Well, at this point, we're gonna go forward with that square project, that we are going to pay those expenses and then turn around and invoice the county for half of those. And so, because we are expending all those funds, that line is increasing, but we'll also see up on the top that transportation is coming back in. It's revenue as a reimbursement.
We had budgeted $210,000 out of our budget, prior to talking to the county. And so I talked to Monica and I said, let's just plug it $190,000 in there and let's just make it even $400,000. And as we move forward, we'll track that and keep it in front of the boards. And I've talked with Stan and he's agreed that that's probably the cleanest way for us just to pay for it. So what we did on the TAP project, we'll invoice them as we go.
So a couple of additional things that I think need added to this have to do with the fire department annexation. So if you look in general administrative, so the page we were looking at with the summary, if you'll go to behind that, and line number 6940, fire district annexation, you'll see that we plugged in $9,750 there. That covers the surveying, the title searches, all of that process that we have to go through. However, there's a couple things that doesn't include, and I've asked him to go back and fix that. One is the 3-acre site that we are required to give them. And currently the selection committee is at the park site. The park that park was purchased with restricted funds. So the general fund has to buy that back from the park department, and then we have to put that in there. So the amount of whatever we're gonna have to pay the parks department for that, I've asked to also be put into this. And then also I have learned that every time we do an ordinance, there is a charge from E-Code to upload it into our codified system. We just passed a whole night's worth of ordinances, and I don't know what the charge is that goes along with that, but I do think it is somewhat substantial, and I asked that they put that dollar figure into this line as well. That way we had a true cost of what the annexation cost the city. So that particular line does need to be increased. I am estimating that it could be somewhere between $15,000 and $20,000 that particular line will need to be increased. In addition, in the police department, which is another page behind, on line 6030 for legal, you will notice that that is increased in the amended budget, which has to do with the AG suit. Since we're not completely finalized and there's still work going on, I want to make sure that we get a good handle on that number. So we plan to reach out to our attorney and see where we're at with that process and how much of his time we have already been billed for, so that we make sure we don't have to go back and amend this. So that is an area we're going to double check on. And then if I could have you turn back to the Parks Department.
Yeah, can we just get on the cemetery fund real quick?
Yes, I went right over it.
It'll be way more simple. The cemetery board, we met Tuesday night, and basically what we've been utilizing inmate labor across many of our departments, right? And obviously with the pandemic, that's not available at this time, and so it's really caused some scheduling issues. And so what we talked to with them about was putting on some part-time help, and we've done so in years past up till this year because we were utilizing inmate labor, so we just took it out. I don't necessarily know that this would, I don't believe that it would require us to do a budget amendment at this time. However, it's not in the budget document, and so I felt better vetting that through you all. The cemetery board approved it, said, yes, we think so, but that's why you see it in here. Like I said, it doesn't necessarily put us into the budget amendment, but I wanted you guys to be aware of what we're doing. Okay.
That's all right. So the Parks Department was obviously the department where we saw the most COVID impact. First with the complete cancellation of spring soccer, which if you look in the revenues, line 4630, we're dropping from 20,000 to 7,000. That is because that spring soccer is a larger event. It has more registrations historically. Our fall soccer is in the works, and they are working on, they're in a holding pattern, if I understand correctly, waiting to see what guidance is out there on COVID and this particular sport. With baseball, it was considered a low contact, and therefore that particular sport was more COVID friendly, maybe, I don't know. But soccer is considered a higher impact sport, and so there are some questions within the industry, and we have not had Michael at our disposal to sit down and talk with him about, does this work or does this not? So those are still, we hope, but they could go away as well. Right below that, you're going to see grant funds for $112,000. That is the reimbursement from DNR for the campus.
Okay.
That was monies that we thought we were going to have last year, and we just didn't get it before last year closed out. So those revenues are in this year's budget, but those are last year's dollars, more or less. Okay, so in some respects, you're going to notice that they float the battleship, and that is fine, but the board does have that understanding that those monies were meant to cover last year's expenses. You'll also notice a decrease in revenue regarding the pool. Again, we didn't get open.
So really what you're saying is, we need to have in mind that the deficit is not $4,226, but $16,000, $116.
Correct. Yes, that's exactly what we're looking at. The pool funds are all much farther below what we anticipated. Again, we didn't get it open. The swim team is at 0. We had to cancel that. If we drop into expenses, one of the lines in here for wages part-time, that 6018, that has been reduced substantially. Again, we didn't need the part-time help that was associated with spring soccer and some of our other programming. However, my understanding, and I think Shawnee is still on the line here, so she may have a better grasp on this, and Mark, please guide me through this, that there may be some interest in using some of this labor to combat the comp time issue that's currently occurring in that department because there's too many fires and not enough time to get everything done in the regular work week. So I feel that the park board is still currently in discussion on that particular line item. Is that appropriate to say?
I believe so.
Okay, about if there is a need or a way that this mitigates a different problem that they're trying to solve. So that is one of those, or two of those lines, the line right below it goes hand in hand, that I'm not sure they're 100% comfortable with at this time. Outside of that, there wasn't anything else I had in my notes to bring up.
Okay, there's something I'd like to discuss, to see if it's something we want to discuss. It has to do with, you go back to to G&A, to the top, we've got, we're showing an impact on the unallocated cash. And a lot of that has to do with, I'm sure, with the reduction in revenue from taxes, the overall impact. So we're showing $35,243 hit on unallocated cash in a situation that I think we need to have a discussion and think, okay, is that an expenditure of unallocated cash to catch up with unprecedented and unexpected situations in terms of sort of the global economic purpose or the impact of what's going on
So,
versus the reserve fund, which is specifically for that?
okay, so Monica, can you explain what happens to our beginning cash balance between the original budget and the amended budget?
No, because I would have to go back and look at that because some of the others, I was not even worrying about the cash, trying to.
Okay.
I really need to go back and look at that because I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm not sure because if we're in the deficit of $138,440, I don't think we're gonna, those numbers up on top are gonna be 100% accurate on that.
Okay.
So I need to revisit that.
Okay.
I would look.
So either way, so I think we just need to keep in our mind, do we want to cover shortfalls out of unallocated cash or shortfalls out of however it does boil out, right? Do we want to cover those out of unallocated cash, or do we want to cover them out of our reserve fund, which is for this type of scenario, which does not impact really the separate and more recent cash flow reserve fund, which is, I guess, debatable whether that is also to be considered here. But again, I just want to keep that out there so that we can all be informed and have input and make hopefully unified, or at least we vote on something with full knowledge of what our options are.
Okay.
And I think it's important to note too, Monica and I keep this back and forth several times, and she kind of lives in this role with other finance directors and this and that. This is based off of a 3.5% decrease in the revenue, right? And in all the conversations we've had, we've kicked around many times, I do feel like we're being pretty conservative with that. I think even in our conversations this week, I think from what we know, from what we can see, I think it's going to be closer to that 2% mark. Maybe a little more.
So I just pulled our current August sales tax, and we are actually running above what we budgeted. So we're not seeing a decrease. I don't know. I mean, I know we have some lag time in there. I don't know what's going to happen for September, October, the rest of the year. When I started putting this together, the 3.5% is a worst case scenario.
And that's what this is built on.
Yes.
It's a prediction based on the worst case scenario.
Based on the worst case scenario,
Okay.
correct. So, I do feel like we can comfortably say a decrease of 2%.
Correct.
And still feel comfortable with that because we're already,
Far enough along the year.
yes, but, that's, we can look at that some more as well to see.
We're still trending in that direction.
Right.
The other thing that I would note, if everyone can go back to that original page that we were looking at, this page here. If you look down in the expenditures, according to state law, we have to amend our budget before we exceed actual budgeted expenditures. The combined parks fund is the only one where we do not plan to exceed our original budgeted expenditures. So we can look at this as an exercise of knowing where we're at, but there is no legal reason to amend this budget. We do not plan to spend all of that money that we budgeted regardless. So for this particular area, it's the #1 area I wanted to get my hands on. I wanted to see what had happened. I wanted to know where we were at and what impact that had, excuse me. And I think this paints that picture perfectly. But we do not have to take action on this particular budget because we will not exceed our budgeted expenditures. And we're not asking for action tonight regardless, but it's something to think about with next week's packet. There is nothing that says we have to do that. So we will make the changes that we've kind of talked about and double check those beginning cash balances in the Parks Fund. And then a new copy of this will be integrated into your next packet for review, and we'll talk closer about approval at that time. Again, our actual expenses to date are not right up against any of these numbers. We're not pushed at this point to make any of these amendments. We still have plenty of time for plenty of discussion if warranted. Okay. All right. So with that, our next item, I'm going to skip to 8, is schedule of Board of Alderman work session to set the goals and expectations for the 2021 budget. So the budget calendar has the departments starting on budget documents in August and definitely rolling in September. They have got to have those into city administrator and to finance director for review and approval at the first part of October. So this, us setting our goals for that year greatly impact the work that's done there. Granted, they can get all of the normal day-to-day operations, payroll, all of that will be put in, but when it comes to what are our priorities for the next year, if they don't know what direction we're headed, those documents become very difficult to complete. So we are looking for availability with everybody's very busy schedule and all the extra meetings that we already have for a work session to discuss this in greater detail. Do you have any recommendations?
I do not.
Are we trying to get it in this month?
If possible. If possible.
So we have a Board of Alderman meeting on the 27th, right?
Correct.
And is this something that would take an hour?
I don't know.
For the first meeting?
Yeah, how many meetings will this entail?
I think that depends on how long we want to sit there. But
I mean, meeting 1 is probably to figure that out, right? To figure
Probably.
out what the questions are, what kind of information we want back to help guide us, and what some of our expectations are besides the ones we come into it with.
right. Right.
Thursdays are good for me. I don't know what goes on here every Thursday.
So
Thursday the 20th?
Thursdays are better for me too. But the reason I was asking that is instead of killing an additional evening, I really like the 7:30 start, but would we want to consider a special 6:30 start with just that work session and then follow into a meeting?
That would work better.
I'm
for
good
me
with that.
because we have to do one-on-one sneak peeks, and my next week I'm at school.
Like nonstop.
Yeah.
So August 27th, 6:30 work session?
Sure. Try to do that.
Great idea. Okay. And with that, future agenda items. I have, we'll pull over the COVID update, of course. We are going to pull over the COC balance, the new City Hall updates, the 2020 budget amendment. We will have the property tax hearing, the public hearing, and subsequent vote on the matter. I would like to add city administrator position to the next agenda, and I will have a job description from our prior work session and posting from our prior discussions as well available for you in your packet, so that we can make some decisions from that point. I have asked the city employees to give us a follow-up on the COVID emergency payment plan that we authorized, just to see how that is going. What are the status of those? I think it was 23 accounts. Just getting a better idea of what service we provided and what the effects of that have been on those citizens. And then I also have down water detention at Frisco. Do you want that at the next meeting, or do you want to just put that on the?
No,
Okay.
it's, I mean, I think at a time when we're talking globally about,
I agree.
yeah.
Okay. Any other items?
I wrote down, we want the health board, if that, health board and task force, if that means correct.
Yes. Or representative thereof.
I'll be bringing up the cemetery rules and regulations.
Okay. So there'll be an ordinance, the cemetery board voted to pass some changes to the cemetery rules and regulations earlier this week. So there'll be an ordinance for our review on what those changes were. Looks like we're good. I'll take a motion to adjourn. First and second, all in favor? All right, we're done.